Well, hello and welcome along to On the Whistle. Oh yeah, I'm your host, Nabbi. I'm taking over from the man who led the mutiny, Alasdair Howorth. Alasdair, how are you doing, good sir?
I'd like to say I'm doing well, but I can't lie. It's disappointing to be back on the sidelines.
Well, you know what? We're going to do the straw poll right now. Let me introduce the others. Hello, Francis Nkwain, our African football expert, and Courtney Freese, the only man who has tin of any credibility, sitting there. No, not only does he have the Spirit Cup for the over 35s in Grays Essex, the man played in the African Champions League, and he also won the Premier Soccer League with Manning Rangers. How are you good sirs doing?
Very well. Thanks for the introduction, Zayn. Happy to be back all together.
Well, listen, last week, Alasdair announced to the world that I would be out, and I heard every word of what you guys said. So here is your moment of truth. If you want to take a shot at the king, you better not miss. But you know what? I'm a man. I've put up my boots. I've put up my gloves a long time ago. I'm a lover, not a fighter. So we'll do the straw poll right now. Here it is. We're not going to do it by a vote of secrecy. We're going to do it very openly. So for all the eyes in favor of Alasdair Howorth hosting from here on in, raise them up right now.
I'm just saying, as the person who edits this podcast, I'm cutting the video for this part. There's no proof of hands raised or otherwise. Inconclusive referendum. You know.
I'm having a bit of a problem with my sound quality. Yeah, I'm missing every second word. So
my connection is.
You know what I love about this? Like, you guys.
I don't know what's going on.
You know what I love about this is I feel like we're holding a referendum in a separatist region, and then I realize Francis and Courtney are pros at getting out of meetings and out of work virtually. That's what I've just realized.
Something feels very putiny about this mutiny.
Well, listen, it is great to be around the braai, and clearly by what everyone has said, we do not want to vote. We don't want to fight to the death. So you know what? We'll continue to do it the way we do it on the whistle. It's everybody's show. And for those of you listening out there, please hit us up on our social media accounts, OTW_podcast on Twitter and Instagram, and find us on Facebook at On the Whistle Podcast. Give us your thoughts. Tell us what you think. I will go to the mailbag at the end of the show. So do stay tuned for that. I will be reading some of your comments and your questions then. But for now, we want to get the braai going. We want to get the embers. We want to get the coals all on fire. And we have some fantastic talkers. We're going to start off with the World Cup qualifiers and, of course, reflect on Pitso Mosimane's new role at Ahli in Saudi Arabia. He's Africa's best coach, most successful coach at the minute, a real leader, and we're going to reflect a little bit about that appointment and what it could bring. But first off, we've seen some qualifiers. We're in the midst of them this week, hence why the podcast is coming out a little earlier. Francis, not the greatest start for Cameroon. Can they turn it around against a Korean team that, many, I think, don't understand the full strength of this team outside of the Asian continent? But let's get your overview of where you think the indomitable lions are now in the build-up to the World Cup.
Well, I think just like what the president of the federation said, Samuel Eto'o, a lot of the teams now, these are friendlies. And they're serving up almost as what the European teams or most teams do, like a sort of pre-season preparation for the main event in November and December. And I think a lot of the coaches are trying their hands out at new personnel, as we discussed last week, the ability to see how they can include maybe 1 or 2, 3 or 4 players who maybe have not been a part of that fraternity till present, and also trying out some other formations. So yes, it was disappointing to see Cameroon lose to Uzbekistan, but at the same time it was nice to see a player like Mbeumo from Brentford get his debut for the Indomitable Lions. It's great to see him as a part of the team. It's great to see a young player like Christopher Wu, who I think is definitely one for the future. Amazing young player, 20 years old, Very Van Dyke-y in style, but with a bit of zest and panache to him. I like him. So it's interesting to see these young men. But like you said, the game against Korea will be an even sterner test. Part of me hopes maybe the coach decides to maybe play a stronger team, maybe something verging or leaning towards his first 11, just to be able, because he is playing competition that is worthy of the best of the indomitable line. So it'd be interesting to see how that game goes. But I know they've just arranged another final friendly against Jamaica in Cameroon in November. Pre-World Cup is the game they'll play before they fly out to the Middle East to Qatar. So I think these games are less about the result and more about maybe some team bonding and that sort of stuff.
Pace certainly being set by Senegal and Morocco. Courtney, I know the Moroccans are a team that have caught your attention.
Form has caught my attention, Zayn. If you look at the Moroccans coming into their last 5 games that they've played, also following on from the African Nations Cup, they've really kicked into form prior to the World Cup. They've brought Ziyech back in from the cold. He wasn't part of the team. He's now part of the team. And then they face a Chilean squad who's really got no form whatsoever, lost their last 5 games. But the team still needs to be beat. Now, Morocco, as our brother Alasdair went to the country, spoke so gloriously about the facilities, also spoke about the African Nations Cup and how well Morocco fared at the African Nations Cup. I just think that there's a team, because of confidence and how the team is playing at the moment, they have an opportunity to go very far. If you just look at their statistics in their last game against a weak Chilean squad, if I must say that, but you still got to beat them. High amount of shots on targets, which is another good thing. Attacking play in abundance. I think this team could go very, very far.
Yeah, I love what you say, Courtney, because, you know, oftentimes when it comes to international football and the World Cup, we look at the players and we say, which team has the best players? They're the ones that are going to win the World Cup. But we know it's not like that. We know it's the teams that are organized, the team that have good support, the team that have good setup. And I think Morocco fall into that category. You know, they will leave no stone unturned in terms of preparing this side for the World Cup. And I think that particularly now, you know, we've spoken before about their new coach, Walid Regragui, you know, obviously won the CAF Champions League and won the Batola Pro in his first season with Wydad. You know, he's been brought in, and that's also brought in Hakim Ziyech from the cold, and brought in Nuswar Mazraoui from the cold as well. And these are 2 elite players. And yes, Ziyech, you know, hasn't had the best time at Chelsea, but we know the quality has this tournament football, guys. Like, you know, this is not about players who turn up week in, week out. These are the stars who step up. And even, you know, if we look back to the AFCON in January, I think Morocco were probably the most complete team. I think Senegal were excellent, and you could tell they were a step above most of the other teams, but they did struggle. Whereas Morocco kind of only fell to an Egyptian team that, you know, won purely on, you know, aggressive, you know, borderline violent football and pedigree alone. And let's be real, when it comes to AFCON football, Pele's Brazil will struggle against Egypt. I don't care who you are. The pedigree of Egypt at an AFCON, you know, any team will struggle. And I think Morocco will, I think they have a really good shot. And I think they also, you know, I've been looking through the groups, and I think for them, it all comes down to that first game against Croatia, because they have Croatia, Belgium, and Canada. And, you know, they play Croatia, then Belgium, then Canada. And, you know, the reality is Belgium are, you know, top tier team, and so are Croatia. And so they have to beat one of those teams if they want to get through this group. And I think that's where the challenge is going to come for them. And, you know, and I think, you know, there's a lot of teams in African football that are reliant on 1 or 2 individual players. I would throw Cameroon into that category. You know, I think one of the issues they faced against Uzbekistan is they missed Frank Zambo Anguissa, who in my opinion is one of the best midfielders in Europe this season. You know, he's been sensational. He's a one-man midfield for Napoli, you know, in many respects. And he's the same for Cameroon. But I think Morocco aren't that team. You know, they have a completely functional midfield, and it exists purely to give Hakimi, give Ziyech, give Boufal the kind of opportunities to create. And I think when you saw them putting together the pieces at the AFCON, they looked incredible. Now, can they do it against the biggest and best teams? Because I think they're, you know, along with Senegal, the team in Africa that have the players who, you know, can step at the top table. You know, I don't think there's a better right back in world football than Ashraf Hakimi. And so I think Morocco present a really, really interesting task. But again, it's World Cup football. It's all going to come down to that first game against Croatia. Can they get a positive result? And, you know, for me, if they lose that game, it's really, really difficult. If they get a draw or if they win, suddenly there's a big chance of them going through.
Zayn, you mind if I just come in there as well? I'm just following on from Alasdair and what he's saying. If you look at that World Cup group, personally, I feel Morocco could pick up 6 points. The Croatia game and the Canada game is where you can get your points. The Belgium game is not a game. Yes, nobody goes out to lose games or draw games. No. But Belgium, they're not firing at the moment, but there's just too much quality in that team at this point in time, even though there's this level of disgruntledness with Martinez and they are questioning, is he going to be the manager to take them to the World Cup? But I feel Morocco's got a good opportunity of collecting 6 points in that group, which could put them second, or I believe second. So I really think this is a team on the up, in the right place to go far. And remember, it's only 7 games to the final.
And remember as well, sorry, like even in the last World Cup when they had a much weaker team, a much worse coach, they almost came out of a group with Portugal and Spain. Like they were a last minute winner or loss from their perspective away from getting out of that group with 2 of the best teams in the world. They have it in their locker. Sorry, Francis.
All I was gonna say is like I don't believe this is an either or. I actually believe, kind of again, like forgive me for turning a lot to what Samuleto is saying. It's like I do like a lot of the narrative he's preaching at present. And I genuinely believe that we have this time 3, 4, and possibly 5 options, teams that can go past this group stage. And so wherever you are, do what you need to do to get yourself where you are. And so for Morocco, it will be the depth of their squad, their style of play, and their stability. Cameroon is slightly different. And to speak to the point you made about Zambo and Gisa, it's something that I thought we should have even examined before when he wasn't called up, because the president of the club says, I don't want my players traveling halfway around the world to play for their countries. And so to avoid any brouhaha for him, a coach makes a decision to say, I'll leave you where you are because you don't need that. It's just some friendlies we're going off on. That's the reason he's not with the team. And when they ask the coach, he says, I'll still take him to the World Cup. But at this point in time, I don't need him. So we understand. But Zambo, for me, isn't a starter in the Cameroon national team, if you ask me. I prefer Hongla. Personally, I prefer Hongla and Onana or Hongla and They make a better and more complementing partnership. Zambo is world class when he plays for Napoli. But with Cameroon, he comes with a little bit of some baggage, and that's why he had a bit of attrition with Eto'o. It's kind of like, you can do this at club level, but you got to bring it to the national team. And if you turn up here and you act like you're playing with players who are less than you or something like that, it engenders a certain unnecessary atmosphere. And I think some of his teammates take exception to the way he plays when he's playing for Cameroon. Nobody questions his talent. We all believe he's truly phenomenal. But they're looking for their format that will work for them. And when you look at the pool that Cameroon's in, it's no different to Ghana. They're trying to find their own way. And I think it's exciting to see so many African countries all making sure that turning up isn't enough. I don't think any of these countries, including Tunisia, are thinking they're just turning up in Qatar and that's already a win. Those days, I think, are gone by. The sort of managers we have now, the fact that we have 5 African countries going to the World Cup with 5 African managers. We're going to talk about a manager. I think these are the things that are really important. And it's not for us to be picking at each other who's doing what better. It's saying we're all trying to be better so we can be part of this ecosystem, and we will be led by African coaches. And that's the stuff I really think is phenomenal.
Of course, not forgetting Senegal, who beat Bolivia 2-0. They play Iran this week in a game that, shouldn't be lost on the fact that there's a situation in Iran at the minute politically that's going on with protest and unrest. For those wondering, the game's actually going to be played in Austria. it's not being played in Iran, which I think could have put the teams in a very uncomfortable position. But great to see Mane on the scoring charts against Bolivia. Underlies his ability, Francis, to do it not only with his club team, but also his national team. He's somebody who steps up, he delivers. I know there was a missed penalty in the shootout, but he scored one in the AFCON. He's a man who continually knows how to produce the goods for his national team and, of course, his club team at the minute, Bayern Munich.
Well, Zayn, you're talking about a guy that's done it everywhere, honestly. Going through a bit of a difficult patch in the last 4 games at Bayern Munich, but a change of climate sometimes bring that. Nobody doubts the boy's ability. He is a one-man wrecking machine. And besides everything else, it's just the effort, Zayn. Effort that guy puts into the team and the respect for the national team he has. He carries the same badge home and away, international home and away. You know, what a pleasure of a role model to have. We just hope he can take that form with Senegal as a unit into the World Cup and really start knocking down some big teams.
All right, guys, that feels like a good point to move us on to our next big talker for today, which is Pitso Mosimane and his appointment at Ahli. No, not in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia. He will no longer be in red. He will be in green, a similar green to what you see Brother Francis wearing at the minute. But to get some analysis on why Pitso has made this move, we spoke to our friend of the show, Edwin Kgaswe from ENCA. He's an assignment editor. He's an expert in African football and broadcasting. Take a listen to what Edwin thinks about Pitso's move to the Middle East. For everyone's benefit, I'll just play it out here one more time, and I think, Alasdair, that'll help you with timings as well. So let me do that.
Pitso's decision to join Ahli in Jeddah in the Saudi Professional League is a very interesting one. It just shows you where he is at the moment as a coach. He's Africa's best ever coach, having achieved enormous success with Mamelodi Sundowns and having gone on to replicate that with Al Ahly in Cairo. Now, I think he's decided to really prove himself as a good coach. He's out there to make sure that people start recognizing his ability as a coach, to show perhaps European clubs how good he is as a coach, because he's taking on a team that is in the second division. Al Ahly are really, really big in Saudi Arabia. They've got massive support, but they are an underachieving team. And I think this is the challenge that Pitso has set for himself, to say, I'll take over this team, I'll get them promoted to the professional league, and then we'll start seeing if we can win some trophies. I mean, this is a team that has won only 3 league titles, as opposed to their rivals Al Hilal, who have 18 league titles in the Saudi Professional League. So I think this is a challenge that Pitso Mosimane has set for himself. It's a project that will set him up as one of the best coaches, not only on the African continent, but in the world, just to prove to particularly European clubs that he can and he will do great things with Al Ahly in Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Edwin, for that analysis. Friend of the show, Mr. Kgaswe, who works for ENCA in South Africa. Gentlemen, this is certainly an interesting talk. It's great to see Pitso back in football. Incredibly successful at Al Ahly, 3 Champions League finals, 2 of those that he won at the helm. We know the dynasty he built in Sundowns and the success that came there, including a CAF Champions League. One of the most successful coaches, I think, in world football in the last few seasons. He also achieved great things at the FIFA Club World Cup, which is the pinnacle in many ways for Pitso and where he can coach with 2 third placed finishes. So again, I think he's someone we all in high regard. I think we can be unafraid and bold and bashful in saying he's also a friend of the show. He's been on with us. We've spoken to him. We have insight into his achievements. And while I think this presents a great challenge in the Saudi First Division, because Al Ahli were relegated from the Saudi Pro League, he's taking over a team that only has 8 points from 7 starts. So, I mean, it is a firefighting job in many ways. He's got to turn them around. On one level, if I put myself as somebody who was at a club or owning a team, wherever it is in the world, I would think that this is a guy I would like involved. So I'm happy to see him back in coaching, but I do feel mixed about him going to a first division team in Saudi Arabia. So I think we'll open it there. I see you nodding, Courtney. So maybe you wanna jump in right now.
Zayn, I've got to be very controlled with my emotions in this summary of what I want to say. I also don't want to come across as disrespectful to the club. I don't want to, right? The club can appoint whoever they want, and other clubs have the right to not appoint whoever they want. That is out there. My problem is, if you look at the lie of the land, how many unsuccessful managers are out there getting jobs consistently. Now, I'm just going to mention one, okay? I'm going to mention Nigel Pearson, who was at Watford, who was at Leicester. When he lost the jobs, then went to Belgium, got a job, and then came back to the English Premier League. In his time as a manager, Nigel Pearson has won nothing, okay? Been unsuccessful at a lot of clubs. How does he get a job in Belgium ahead of a very successful manager managing a team possibly 3 or 4 times bigger with a fan base than the clubs in Belgium, Genk, that Pearson was at? How is that possible? Now, go back to my introduction. Clubs can appoint whoever they want to. Who is promoting the Pitso brand that is only ticking boxes in one area and not in areas like Belgium, Turkey, where he's on the fringes of breaking into Europe's top leagues? Because Pitso has taken his team to the Club World Cup and done well. Pearson has not gone nowhere near that. Walter Materazzi has not gone nowhere near that. Malky Mackay has not gone nowhere near that. But Pitso is now gone to Saudi Arabia to manage. It just doesn't make sense. And this is where people start talking about it's not fair. Well, the world is not fair. But I just think that I'm happy he's employed, yes, but I feel there was a bigger job out there for him if his recruitment team were pushing his narrative better.
Well, if I may interject, I think Brother Courtney makes some very, very pertinent points. Primarily, agency is a key part of how talent is pushed. So you might look at, okay, cool, who knows he exists, because a lot of owners are not watching the World Club Championships, let's be brutally honest. Only stakeholders really take an interest in it to that extent. He's not necessarily, Pitso's not necessarily a household name outside of our shores. It was an introduction even to me, a member of this rather glorious gathering of intellectuals. Pitso was somebody who I knew as an assistant in the South African setup back in the day, so I'd come across the name, and then we started talking about him, and I was like, oh my Lord, how do we not know? And I like to think I am kind of knowledgeable about the game, especially on the continent. But the selling of our products is almost more important than the content of our products. And we all know players, and I'm sure you, Courtney, and I'm sure Brother Zayn, I know undoubtedly Ahli has probably played with or know of some incredible talent on our continent that were never known to the world. And that's usually more to do with the lay of the land. It's the way it's done, and it's the exposure we engender as well. when we are successful. Because with all things, especially management, network is more important than talent, capacity, ability. Now, if we were to look at the Saudi Arabian option, I also have to highlight the fact that right now, Saudi Arabia as a nation is making a point. They're doing this with golf, they're doing this with boxing. As a nation, they're encouraging. It's a very wealthy club, so I assume the owner of the club also has very good political connections as well. And so part of this is also a statement. And I like that the statement also comes in the form of one of Africa's greatest getting an opportunity to show their wares there. Um, but to speak to the point that Zayn made, and to speak particularly to the point that you've made, Courtney, there is a tinge of disappointment in that we know he deserves better. But I also think timing is also important. And he has been out of work for 3 to 4 months, of which we know he chose to take a pause for the cause. So there are not so many jobs going. And usually to get on the radar of some of these maybe European or South American or North American clubs, which I know is a space I, for one, think he could easily fit into really, really well. It's more about hitting the news cycles. So he could have taken 6 months if I were working with him and just say, commentate, go and come to England when it's go to Sky News and go to ESPN and talk, share your knowledge of the game. Let the other guys also look and go, oh, wow, uh, quite knowledgeable. How would you have done this? Why do you think this player did okay? And we're all criticizing his decision in this moment. You exhibit your wares. And I think that's the part that we don't do so well. But sometimes it's because we aren't granted the opportunities to. So I think following this move, he will get greater moves if he wants to continue in the game, but he must be more aligned to the marketing of himself beyond our shores. Now, if maybe he's happy and that's what he wants, which we don't know, he may be content with where he is and likes that challenge. But I think there are many other coaches in our space that we must understand that there's a game to be played. And people like Zayn know this very, very well. Um, Sometimes your phone rings simply because somebody saw you on TV and went, oh, wow, forgot about this guy, or don't know this guy. Anybody knows this guy? And they'll call a Zayn and say, you're the producer on the show. Can we get a number for this dude? Don't know him, but like what his team's doing. Sometimes they don't know how to reach you. So we're just happy for him. I would like to believe, and we hope he really does well and gives us yet another arrow that we can stick in this bow and see how we can't have him hit some higher targets and maybe some more challenging and greater leagues.
Great answer, Francis. Loved hearing you earlier, Courtney. And Ali, I promise I'm going to bring you in. I just look at it this way. And again, this is not in anything that's going to be a contradiction to what you said, Francis or Courtney, but we see Benny McCarthy at Man United working with the strikers. We see Bradley Carnell as the head coach of the MLS expansion team, St. Louis City. We see Carlo Torre working with Brendan Rodgers, and albeit struggling at the minute with Leicester City. And you look at somebody like Pitso, who is a specialist in this craft, who is a brain, who is, had he been born in Spain and coached and achieved great things with Real Sociedad or Sevilla or one of the, let's call them mid-level smaller teams, he would be somebody that would be incredibly hot property in the top 5 European leagues would be chasing him, national teams would be chasing him. Or if he had achieved some form of success, perhaps in South America, with some of the big boys out there, whether it's Boca or Corinthians or Flamenco, wherever it might be. And I just think, given we have some guys who are doing some great work in the club spaces overseas, because let's face it, that's where the money is, that's where the talent is, and that's where the opportunities are. I just think you've got probably the best kept secret in African football, and people are missing out on it. And I do hope his entry into Saudi Arabian football, albeit in the first division team, might perhaps open up people in that league to him, and also Asia, because we also know that the Asian market is an important market, and one where, maybe he becomes the guy who not only dominates in Africa, dominates in Asia, and maybe takes a bit of a longer road to get where he needs to go in next. I think we want to bring in Ahli and then maybe Courtney.
Yeah, I think, I really like what Francis said about kind of media stuff. Obviously, I think the famous example is Jurgen Klopp, who obviously was a sensational coach and manager, but he didn't really get his break until he wasn't coaching, but he was being a pundit on kind of German TV. And I think it was for one of the World Cups, was it 2010 or something? And that's what kind of, built his profile and turned him into this kind of, coach. And yeah, obviously, Pitso doesn't have those opportunities to break into that space in Europe. And so he doesn't have the capacity to do that. But I think Francis is, totally spot on in terms of that marketing capacity. I think what I found really interesting from him joining there is that it felt almost like he showed his hand, for all those of us, in the kind of African circles, we had a lot of hope after the Al Ahly exit that, this was finally going to be the moment we were going to see an African coach make it big. He proved himself in South Africa, he proved himself in Egypt, and now he's going to make that step to, we were hoping somewhere like Courtney said, Belgium or Turkey, one of these kind of, maybe B tier leagues in Europe and build up that way. And I think the reality is it feels like that hasn't happened, and, from what we know about Pitso is it hasn't happened for a lack of him trying. He's the type of guy who will go out and market himself to these people, building those networks, but they haven't given him that opportunity for whatever reason. Obviously, we know that there's a lot of reasons, good and bad, not that he hasn't been selected. But I also wouldn't sell Al Ahly short, because I think what's interesting is it's the first project since SuperSport United that Pitso has had to build, not a top tier team, and even more so than SuperSport United, to be honest, because SuperSport back then were in a really strong position. But Sundowns, he takes over when they're already, probably the best performing team in South Africa. Al Ahly, he comes in when they're about to win the league. Whereas this is a really different project than Al Ahly. And we also know Pitso, he's not going to take this, with the selling as, you've got a second division Saudi side, he would not take that. We know that if he's taking that, he's got the backing, he's got the promises of the kind of ownership to be pushing. And that makes sense, because obviously Al Ahly they're not a second division club, are they? They're a team that realistically is looking to be moving up the league and back into the Champions League, where they really belong in Asia. Obviously we can't speak with the same expertise, but they are a big team. They're one of the biggest, behind the likes of Al Hilal. And so I think there's a big opportunity for him to build a project and see it out, again, another few years. And Pitso has shown that he has the capacity to have longevity in a way in which other coaches aren't, particularly with Al Ahly, but also Sundowns. Sundowns is not a forgiving job, as Courtney and Zayn can tell us. But I think that's a really interesting and unique opportunity for Al Ahly. And look, the reality is, and we bemoan it, and rightly so, but the reality is Asia is above Africa in the pecking order in terms of where people are taking, particularly coaches from. But what I would say is we have the encouragement of coaches. I look to, like, say, Ange Postecoglou, who did a sensational job in Japan and got that job at Celtic, who again, are similar to maybe Al Ahly, where, football wise, they're not maybe the top table, but culture, fan wise, profile wise, they are at the top table. And so I think that it is, it's sad because it's shown that he couldn't make that step up. But, I think, Al Ahly are a great team for him to be building up to that step, because if he can get them up this season, which will be the objective, and if he doesn't, he probably won't last. But if he can get them up and then in the next two seasons, get them to the top table in Saudi, get them to the top table in Asia, then I think it'll be another feather in a cap, because the reality is he's not going to be able to move from a top side like Al Ahly in Egypt, the top African side, and move straight into a top European side. What he has to show is, actually, I can take the teams that are down in the bottom of the league and I can take them up the league. Because if he gets a job in, whether it's the Championship or Belgium or somewhere, he's probably not going to walk into the Club Brugge job, but he might walk into one of the Lommel or a club like that where it's lower down. But if he can show, I've been at Al Ahly in Saudi, I was in the second division. I got them promoted. I took them to the Champions League, blah, blah, blah. Suddenly he has a much bigger CV than he necessarily had when he, was at Sundowns and even at Al Ahly, because Al Ahly are, for all the amazing success he had, they are the biggest team. They're the best team. They're expected to be there. And so I think it's frustrating, but I think it also presents really great opportunity for him.
Zayn, I think we could talk on this topic for the whole day, but I just feel that Alice has raised a few more points on top of what I also wanted to add. The thing that Pitso has, which a lot of managers don't have, I believe he's a two-tier coach. He's not only managed powerful, successful teams, but he's also managed teams who were struggling and made them successful. Now, people will forget Sundowns were not a successful team in South Africa. There were only two teams in South Africa, Pirates and Kaizer Chiefs. Sundowns were even...
There was a third team called Manning Rangers.
Well, I was their juggernaut. You don't need to remind me about that. But Pitso took these teams and made them successful. Now you have a manager that can manage teams from the bottom and make them successful, which is a unique skill. And then goes to Al Ahly, there's a powerful team, and continue their power and make them even great. So this is my problem I have here. And Francis lent onto this as well. The owners, I believe, and this is just my perspective, are lazy in their scouting for who's successfully out there. All right? Now, I'm going to equate it to a very simple, not on the same level of what my example I'm trying to make. As you know, I work in a school. When we have an Ofsted inspection, my job is to find out who are the Ofsted inspectors in the area and who may be coming. And then when I find out who may be coming, then I go into their profile. What are they about? What do they do? What was their last inspections? You do your background so you know who is out there and who's coming, so you know how to react. I just think owners have been lazy in sometimes, and I'm not all owners. Don't get me wrong. Look at Celtic. Look at Celtic, what they did, and the guy they went and recruit. But now look at Dundee United. Look at the circumstances that Malky Mackay left Cardiff. Dundee United give him a job. There's a successful guy like Pitso Mosimane out there making juggernauts of teams. It's just that I just think the same names. Just now, Alan Pardew is going to get a job. Just now. He's sitting somewhere doing nothing, waiting to be employed. It's lazy recruitment by people with money sometimes.
Well, I know it's been called an all-boys club very often. And so it speaks to the point I was making earlier on. It's about understanding that there is a network that exists. And so in this space, just like when you're in the US, for example, they recruit from amongst the people that they know as well. And very few people go outside of their comfort zones, including owners. But the owners is on talent to also make themselves available to be on the radar, and not just the radar, but get into the psyche. And that's why this thing I was talking about with the press thing, it helps because it just allows to make a case for different. Now, for a person like Pitso, I know, for example, that I, for one, had mentioned his name to a couple of owners who were just beginning to say, okay, but we all know that this space in the United Kingdom, for example, the season just began. So yes, they fired a few, but most people are still looking and going, okay. And before we could even have a convo that went beyond, I'm 2 weeks old in the UK at present, so to speak, or 3 weeks. And we've had maybe like a few, and it was like, oh, and he's in employment already. So this didn't happen overnight. So that meant from the moment he said, I take a break with my holiday, he made his CV available to certain people, or certain people came knocking. Meanwhile, in the European space, which is the only space we can speak for at present, it tends to be by the time you're approaching November, then they're beginning to do the cullings. And, so houses like Cardiff that were able to get rid of a young coach who was learning his craft, so to speak, and doing what he was doing, those kind of clubs have ownership that have a Belgian club and it's into those kind of spaces that I believe somebody like him could go into. But these kind of clubs I have to say, didn't necessarily have enough time to be able to say, okay, we know of this guy who's been waiting for 6 months. He can afford to wait. I mean, like it's not like he's hungry, and that's why I give the example early on of Pochettino. So there are good managers who are out there, failed or not, who have names and have CVs, but you kind of have to wait. So the island party you spoke about hasn't been in gainful employment for a hot minute, but he will get a gig probably because he'll bide his time, but he will stay relevant. So in this time, what I meant was while Pitso had the luxury of being able to still not be hungry and not be desperate for a job, if the European space or the South American space or the North American space was his target, then you play a game that makes you noticed by that space. And you must give that time. There's a whole World Cup coming. As far as I'm concerned, he could have been like a prime candidate for being a pundit on one of these countries where you then exhibit your wares, which is his brain. But people don't get the opportunity to get to know him. So we can't be mad at them for him being quick in his decision to take on a project, which must be a project because he's that intelligent. So he probably believes this project will be the exhibition for his wares. And then maybe they'll judge afterwards.
I think this is probably a good place to leave it. Thank you for all the discussion, guys. And look, if you look around the Saudi professional league, there are a lot of very good coaches in that league. So maybe there's method to the madness. Maybe there is no madness. Maybe it's the fact that I can come up against the like of Nuno Espirito Santos in a year and start to beat some of these highly rated or once upon a time much vaunted brains in Europe to show that I can outcoach. So maybe we know that there's a lot of money in Saudi Arabia. I think, Francis, as you mentioned, boxing, football, golf, they've gone into all types of sports that have brought with it certain criticisms and certain kudos. Maybe there's a long-term game plan of going, you know what, I think I could maybe outcoach these guys. But let's leave it here, gentlemen. Before we go, I'm going to hit the mailbag. A couple of weeks ago, we did a podcast asking what's happened with, I was going to say Mo Farah, Mo Salah's mojo. And we had a number of people giving us their hot takes. We had Conal Levine sending us a question and saying, why move Mo wider when he was lethal where he was? And this is obviously in relation to his positioning at Liverpool. And we also had Kalen Geeky tweet in going, nope, he's playing wider. He's playing wider than any point in his Liverpool career, and Trent is not providing him the same cohesion going forward as in the past, and he's out of form, which hurts Salah's ability to get into the box. All right, guys, we love hearing from you. Please tweet us. Send us your comments on Facebook. Again, I'll plug it, OTW_podcast on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to find us on Facebook and YouTube, On the Whistle Podcast, just search for that. Post a comment. Leave a rating. Leave a review. It helps people find the show. And maybe when we have enough people subscribing and listening, we'll finally get Courtney to declare himself on social media. All right, guys, always a pleasure. Thank you, Ahli. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Francis. We look forward to sitting around the braai next week. I hope you have a good week.
Thank you, Zayn.